Welcome to Health Center. My name is Anika Daniels-Osaze, and I am the Director of the Office of Diversity, Education, and Research here at SUNY Downstate Medical Center. We had a wonderful month where we sponsored a Hispanic Heritage Awareness event, and I'm so happy to be able to produce this kind of programming for you, as well as the institution. This month, we were able to bring in speakers to focus on a particular theme, which was entitled, "How do we embrace Latino culture while improving Latino health?" This program was actually co-sponsored with the Arthur Ashe Institute for Urban Health and with the Brooklyn Health Disparity Center. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists for this event. We were able to bring in 3 key speakers who could talk specifically about Latino health, Latino culture, and race, ethnicity, politics, and economics, and how it affects healthcare within our communities. So first, I would like to introduce to you Mr. Umberto Brown, who works for the Arthur Ashe Institute for Urban Health, and his position is Director of Health Disparities Initiative and New Constituency Development. And Mr. Brown is of Panamanian descent. Our next panelist is Ms. Patricia Peralta. She is a current medical student in her 3rd year here at SUNY Downstate's College of Medicine. And our final panelist is Dr. Samuel Marquez, who is the co-director of Gross Cell Biology in the College of Medicine, the director of Gross Cell Biology in the College of Health-Related Professions, and the director of the Anatomical Donor Program here at SUNY Downstate, and he is of Colombian descent. I'd actually like to start with Dr. Samuel Marquez, and if you could talk to us about how can we improve healthcare education within SUNY Downstate to make sure that we are being more culturally competent and inclusive of the Latino populations?
I think that the key term here is diversity. You know, everybody is in agreement that diversity strengthens any institution, any business. And so when I went to a AAMC minority faculty development, the first question that they asked was, what's diversity? And they asked us to take a look around, and I'm looking at the audience. This is the face of the US population, but it doesn't match the US healthcare system, right? So there's a big pervasive gap that exists. So there's several ways to try to address that. The way I do it is I like to expose young underrepresented groups. I go to high schools, and now I'm beginning to explore junior high schools, and I expose them to the early career opportunities that they may not even know that exist out there. So I have something called Anatomy Education Day that was funded by the American Association of Anatomists. I take medical students with me when I go to my high schools because it's very important to see young faces of underrepresented groups so they can see a role model, because there's a big difference between mentorship and role model. They don't necessarily go hand in hand. That's the first thing. So for my mentorship side, I have taken in the last 9 years over 100 first-year medical students. You know, it's a very top secret. Nobody knows about that. But I do that. And unfortunately, I was thinking in my head of the 100 who were the underrepresented groups that I've taken. And it pretty much matches the number, the percentage of underrepresented groups in the healthcare system. For whatever reason, you know, I'm still trying to figure that out, but very few blacks, fewer Hispanics. And so when I try to recruit, because I know I immediately link with the minority groups when, you know, it was not easy to become a co-discipline director here. I'm the only Hispanic in New York State that's the director for an anatomy course at a first-year medical institution. Wasn't easy, I'm telling you. But you have to prove yourself. You constantly have to prove yourself. And I'll just tell you one story. I'm very passionate. Aside because I'm Hispanic, you gotta be passionate if you're Hispanic. But somebody helped me out, a Jewish Orthodox faculty person at Mount Sinai School of Medicine. He took the time on a Sunday and he guided me through a rough patch of time when I was taking gross anatomy. And so because of that individual, you know, I did very well in anatomy. So I know that you have to invest the time for students who are struggling to give them an opportunity to excel, okay? And so that's why I do my education outreach programs throughout the city. But when I went to my chair, my chair wasn't really enthusiastic about it. He actually said to me, don't you have something better else to do? Like write a grant, get a paper, because this is the currency that thrives here in institutions, publish or perish. That's the bottom line. So I do this on the side, my education. I'm not evaluated. It's not part of my job description. So I do it because I believe in it, right? So when I tell my other colleagues and all the medical students in this room, you know who they are, they say, this education outreach is a flash in the pan. It's a one-shot deal. You don't know if it's working or not. And, there's an argument to be made about that. But here's the deal. When you do this, you don't see the effects right away. You're planting the seeds, and it's 10 years from that day that you'll see if it bears fruit or not, okay? I still remember in my high school days, somebody came over from Lehman College and gave a talk in physics. I wanted to be an astrophysicist after that, okay? So so anecdotally, it really affected me. So that's I'm going to stop there because I don't want to keep babbling. But if you have any insight into what I just said, or if you have questions, I'll be happy to address it.
Thank you.
By the way, this lovely young lady was one of my students that I took to Boston. I don't know how I recruited you, so we were looking at variation of arterial branches. This is right after taking her Unit 1 exam. So, and she was in my PBL group. And so I said, would you like to, and then the other lady was in my PBL group, so I partnered them up. And then I said, instead of just looking at the material here at SUNY Downstate, let's go to Cornell and look at bodies there, because I know all the directors of all the medical. I just pick up the phone and I'm in. So this is somebody who's a go-getter. There are others that say, no, I'm overwhelmed. It's too much volume of material. I don't have the time. They took the time out. So when she applies for residency, I guarantee you that one of the topics when they look at her CV is, I noticed you published and you went to a national meeting. Can you tell me a little bit about it? So here she is, maybe applying for surgery, and she's going to be talking about arterial branching variations, right? So that's something.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you. And now, Patricia, as a medical student, can you talk about what we are doing well here at Downstate to be able to meet the needs of our Latino population in terms of cultural competency and what we need to improve upon?
With the development of the new curriculum, I think the school has done a good job at trying to expose students more to this idea of how do we interact with patients. So when we are in PBL classes, we have this new class where once or twice a week, we have standardized patients come in, we discuss cases, and we practice how do we interact with a patient with a particular problem. So I think with the new curriculum, they've incorporated different cases that have to do with how do you address a patient who might have a problem that has to do with maybe they have a barrier or some sort of access due to maybe where they live, or maybe they have a problem where they need to change their diet, but they're really focused on, keeping the kind of diet that they have that's based on their culture, but you want to improve their health. So how do you address that with the patient? How do you keep in mind what kinds of things are important to them? Like we are taught in terms of like addressing what values are important for the patient and thinking about as a provider, you want to keep those things in mind. In terms of what we can improve, I think we're doing a good job so far at recruiting students of different diverse backgrounds. Definitely, each year I see more and more students who are from underrepresented groups coming in. So I think it's just continue to work on that. I know that recently someone reached out to us from the Office of Diversity, recruiting students of underrepresented backgrounds to serve as tour guides. And actually, I served as a tour guide as a first-year medical student. And it was nice to serve as a guide because I can be there to kind of show my face and tell the students, hey, we're here. There are underrepresented groups. I think it helps when you come to an interview and you see people who look like you and you're like, wow, if they're there, I can be there too, you know? So I think just I continue to recruit more students to be tour guides or just be out there in open houses and just showing our faces and, you know, just giving that hope and that encouragement that they can be in that position as well.
Now, as a third-year student, do you feel that you're able to go through your rounds and you're comfortable with different populations that you know enough culturally to be able to ask the questions that are necessary to get them the quality health care that's necessary?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think one of the huge strengths of Downstate is we get exposure to interacting with patients. In our first year, we have these preceptorships that are set up where we're already going to the clinics, we're following a particular physician, and they allow us to interact with the patients. We can observe the physician, their kind of their style, and you get a broad exposure in terms of the community. It's not only here in Brooklyn, they also send us out to other areas. There's clinics that we go to in Manhattan as well. So we get a nice broad kind of exposure. But yeah, I feel very comfortable as a third year. I think our schedule works very well where we still have enough time to kind of do those things that we need to do.
Thank you. And Mr. Brown, so in terms of the different factors that affect healthcare, we have to deal with politics, we have to deal with race, we have to deal with economics. Can you just give us a historical context of why there are so many different health care issues within the Latino community and how we can address those based on those different factors?
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. Happy that this discussion is taking place and people are sharing some of their views and the challenges that we face. You know, timing is everything sometimes. And I'm happy that this discussion is happening now. It's happening when the state is doing a major reform of the health system with an initiative they call District. I'm happy that some of us, I spend a lot of time in international work. Latin America is not a concept, it's a place, it's people, systems. Some of us visit it all the time, understand the system, understand the interrelation and connection between what's happening here and what happened here, why we're here, who are here. And I think that some of the time with the discussion, I always tell people, just in France, in the discussion about same issues. And I always say, when you're in different part of the world, the discussion takes different structure. In every other part of the world, when you discuss social policies, when you discuss economics, people are forced to discuss their politics, who you are, what is your vision of the society, what position you take about the history and the people, and what is your proposal about that type of democracy? What is your concept of that democracy? In the US, we tend, as I participate in many, many of the discussions, to speak like if it's a problem of technological issue. We have different political position. We have different view of society. We have different concept of people, of their rights, but we don't discuss it. We hide it behind the discussion of so-called policies and technical approach to it. So you can have four people in a room who have significant differences about healthcare and what should be done and whose needs we should address that never get discussed, and we hide behind discussion, and that's why we don't understand and we don't move forward. So I'm happy the brother talk about truth, and I think the first issue in health that we need to deal with is what Paul Farmer from Harvard University, who does a lot of work in Haiti, says is a pathology of power. That's the first pathology we need to address. How health is constructed, who defines. The second issue I would say is that for whom is organized, who's included, who we addressing. And one of the great things of this period, of this discussion, is that we have enough information to know that one, health is defined more by the social determinant of health. That is determined where you live, how you live, racism, sexism, sexual orientation, geographical location, more than the interaction with illnesses, because those are the roots you have to address, and that's a big significant difference in the way we approach health at this point. Coincidentally, for those who are from Latin America, the issue of addressing social determinant and social issue is part of our DNA. Most of the radical thinkers in Latin America, most of the people who propose universal health care were physicians. Che Guevara was a physician. Allende from Chile, that was overthrown in 1973, was a physician. The president of Chile right now, Bachelet, is a physician. And if you look at their concept, the Minister of Health of Bolivia is indigenous, physician from Harvard, but also practices indigenous traditional alternative care integrally, understanding the needs and the culture of the people. So since we're talking about Latin American, we're honoring Hispanic. It's not just food and dinner, it's people. And people have specific history here. So I want to say that one of the social determinants of health, it's not in my head, I invented it, is it there, is addressing the issue of racism, historical discrimination, as one of those impediments for people to access care. Because one of the issues that we discuss in, and the brother started out with statistics, is that statistics is not neutral. The outcome is not something. We can stigmatize people as we use statistics for group if we don't understand the context, the history, and the condition that created the reality for those people. And the experience of African American, which I'm a Pan-Africanist person. I monitor and see what happened to African people around the world. And different descent. I'm from Panama, and Panama means that you come with multiple roots of your identity. When my grandmother from Martinique, one of them from Jamaica, and I grew in the countries I say you only should speak Spanish. But I speak French Creole, French, English, Patois, Jamaica, and then went to school and speak Spanish. So I was multilingual. But I want to put it in historical context, and I give you one. It's not only us, I do a lot of UN work. We are dealing that we have changed the way we define nation, citizenship, participation, gender politics, sexual orientation, because in the 18th and 19th century, those things were racialized. The American statistics was racialized. African American was presented as slaves, 3/5. Mexican once was white in the census, then it was flipped to be Mexican. Arab used to be white, then it was switched. The political discussion determined how I count you. It's not a technical problem. If you look at the census from 1790, you look at what happened in the 20s, you see different groups classified differently, and those things are about privilege, because those racial identity is not a problem of biology. We knew it wasn't biology. It's a social construct that say who has right, who votes, who have access to property, and it reminds me of something my grandma used to always tell me. We went to discussion about if the glass is full or empty, and you go to your first class in the university, they send you out to the country, and you come back thinking you're very smart. It's a class. And she turned around and said, well, son, I don't know if you're so sophisticated you think you are. I think your first question is to ask, what is it you're doing? If you fill in the glass, it's half full. If you're emptying the glass, it's half empty. We don't always ask the right question. So we moved from a system that excluded people because of race, excluded Native American as only non-taxpayers, and in the 20s and the 30s had policy not to allow immigrants to come in based on eugenics, which was science, accepted. Until the Second World War, when the Jewish people, crime was committed against them, and they created a Holocaust. Those signs, those things don't change until recently, where we racialize people, we invisibilize them. The society was more about exclusion. I know we have changed because one of the conferences that we went to, the Durban Conference, against racism and established new rules of recognizing that society are not monolingual, they're mostly multilingual, that we're multicultural, that we're multilinguistic, and we're even multireligious, diversity. Because we also demonize indigenous religion, fetishism, they believe in the land and the earth and the sun. Forget African religion. If they're nobody and they're invisible, why you will respect their spiritual belief? How you want to integrate it? So how does that matter? And some also do the work with health disparities and cultural competency. If you do not see a person as an equal human being, if you see them, they're invisibilized, can you treat them competently? The census is what determines what we do, and in those census are politically defined, they're racialized, and it's a political discussion of who get included. The political discussion about the Mexican. Well, in 1920, Mexicans were white. What would Mr. Trump do? It's until 1970 they were white. Those are issues. The first science that you need to learn is history. If you don't know history, any other science you apply, including medicine, you're going to fail. Because you don't understand the context, the people, and who you're relating to. Latino come from complex society. We're not here by accident. Each group, I can tell you what year they came, why they came, and the contradiction that they come with. Dominicans came after the invasion of 1965. Most young Dominicans don't even remember and know that. And what is the implication of that? The Panamanian came after the canal was finished and they didn't have more jobs. Each of them, the Cubans and their different groups that come at different moment and end up here and has to navigate system, and there are positive lessons to learn in that discussion. Because if we come here and we get racialized immediately, and I love to see when the Latin American elite who self-identify themselves white, when they end up here and say, no, you're not white, you're in the other category. Because the whiteness is defined in dominant white society. That discussion, if you don't have it with Latin Americans in an in-depth way, you don't understand what you're dealing with. You don't know their feeling. So I'm suggesting that for us to address those things, we have to understand who the people are, what is the experience, and we also have to discuss, and it's not only here. If you go to London, you go to Paris, it's the same discussion. Former colonial state, the people are now moved to those cities where the resources are, and the identity issue have to change because it's not the same person as 50 years ago. And the issue of minority is relative. Colonial society, whites are minority, but they still rule. They still define. South Africa was a country where majority was black. Latin America, and I finish, I want to explain this. There's a discussion that takes place when we're doing cultural competency with Latino. I think it's fundamental. I want to answer like 4 things about Latino that I think is important. One, that when we ask identity, for race or ethnicity, we want to answer citizenship, nationality. Because we've been socialized to avoid the ethnic racial question. Because our elite, in their concept of identity, in the 18th century where only white country developed, they were interested to disappear everybody that was not white or European, and they changed even the statistic to make that happen. But if you don't know that history, so in most of our society, and I did the 2010 census with the UN, so I've been to every country, I know Colombia, to Chile, all of them. The issue of understanding how people identify themselves and how they are identified, you have to understand the history. If you don't understand the history, for example, in the Americas, we have the same concept of eugenics of white superiority. In the US, if you're a majority white, you don't mix. One drop of black blood changes your future. No property, no citizenship, no anything. In Latin America, whites were a minority. But the same concept is developed, but in a different way, what we call mestizaje. In Britain, since at those times they consider indigenous people inferior, these are scientific theory. Go and read it. Read Ingeniero, read Nascimento, all the theoreticians of that period. And so what they did is mix the black and the indigenous people, hoping that in 50 years, Latin America will be white. With the same object, to create European society. That was the model. Here you protect a majority, in the rest of the region, you convert that majority to become, if you don't understand that, you don't understand the tension that occur. So where I want to go with this, there are practices, there are best practices that I think we need to understand and is happening around the world. People of color, racialized in different places, dehumanized in different places, are now in certain countries and are finding commonality with other oppressed people in those countries. The experience of African American and Latin American in this country is fruitful. In the 60s, you have the farm workers and the civil rights movement. Later on, you have school movement for open school. I think that continues to be the strategy. If people don't get divided, but have the same concept of a new type of democracy that include everyone, less racialized, health system that respond to multiple needs, and we all understand that, I think we can find diversity and unity in a new type of society, a new type of health system. If you get divided and fight about particularity that doesn't make a difference in the system, then all we do is keep the same system of exclusion. So my recommendation is to understand how race works, understand how all the other social factors work, social determination, how they work and how we use it in designing the new system. Some of us who are involved at the level of system are hoping that we all participate in designing it. For those who want to be health professional, the first thing that I ask you to do is not to give up who you are. You bring a body of knowledge with you. You bring a body of sense of what is needed, and you need to trust that, and that's not assimilate, but integrate your knowledge to make the system much more flexible and to the reality of who we face today, and that it produce diversity without equity doesn't produce any real society that is just. We need diversity that is done by equity.
Thank you so much. That's a perfect note to end on.